The Trump regime's prosecution of an unhoused, mentally ill individual who they accuse of vandalizing the World War II memorial is already backfiring in the face of the Trump regime. You may have heard right now Donald Trump and Jeanine Pirro, after being exposed for fabricating the case against David Hearn in the reflecting pool, they've now moved on and they've made their target a 41-year-old unhoused, apparently mentally ill woman by the name of Meiselas, who was living in a tent nearby the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. She was seen living in this tent the day before. She then live streamed herself appearing to engage in some vandalism by the World War II memorial and kind of shouting incoherent things. And there was a part where she talked about urinating on the floor, and then she was kind of live streaming herself urinating. And it was, certainly from a mental health perspective, something that was kind of deeply concerning to watch, but it's obviously kind of a mental health crisis that is taking place. And normally that, I went to school in Washington, D.C., law school in undergrad, and, having lived in downtown Los Angeles and having, been a lawyer who goes to big cities, small cities, we all know about the mental health kind of epidemic or crisis that exists in this country. And we often know that there's kind of correlation sometimes in the unhoused with certain untreated or incorrect interventions regarding mental health. And so normally it would be a story about intervention and help, and it wouldn't be a story act. It would just be something that happened, and it would be, how do we improve our system? But it wouldn't be the president of the United States. But in this deranged presidency of Donald Trump, where everything is a political thing, this is now his next target, this 41-year-old Meiselas from Kentucky. It's clearly someone struggling with mental illness who was unhoused, living in a tent in Washington, D.C. And Donald Trump posted on social media, "Our beautiful World War II memorial was just hit by spray painting vandals. There can be no greater insult to those American heroes who died in World War II. First the reflecting pool, now this. We are on their trail. Where do these animals come from?" DJ Tush comes from Kentucky. She's not an animal. Her name is Meiselas. She's someone who clearly struggles with mental health issues. And the fact that this is your behavior is sick. And the Trump regime and Jeanine Pirro have done everything they can to keep her incarcerated indefinitely. And even the federal judge is saying, no, you can't do that. Like, what are you talking about? A magistrate judge denied U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's second bid to lock up Meiselas on charges of vandalism to the World War II memorial, saying that the United States Attorney's Office for D.C. botched the standard and recycled arguments he already rejected. This was a minute order as to Meiselas. On review, the court denies the government's motion for reconsideration. For starters, the government's filing largely misconstrues the nature of the court's ruling by arguing certain factors demonstrate that Ms. Ferris presents a risk of flight that cannot reasonably be mitigated with conditions of release within the meaning of the statute. The court did not reach those issues in the context of a full detention hearing because it found the government failed to show that it was even entitled to a detention under the relevant statutory section based on the theory that this case presents a serious risk that Ms. Ferris will flee. The government's motion largely fails to grapple with the threshold issue that the court actually decided. Moreover, the government itself invokes a standard that permits reconsideration if the judicial officer finds that information exists that was not known to the movement at the time of the hearing. But under that standard, the government's motion fails to identify any such new information that it contends was not known to it at the time of yesterday's hearing. To the contrary, the motion essentially just recycles the same arguments that the court considered already, so ordered. And so the Trump regime is even losing to Meiselas, and it's not to suggest that someone who's unhoused or struggles with mental illness is unable to mount a defense. But when you have the full force and effect of the government throwing every resource at a prosecution, and you're losing to Melissa Ferris repeatedly, I think that also speaks to some systemic issues at the DOJ. Also, they have not actually, as of this recording, got an indictment against Ferris. They filed, which they're allowed to, a felony complaint based on a filing of the criminal complaint, but they're going to need to get an indictment because it is a felony in federal court. I want to bring in Harry Litman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel and Substack and podcast. And Harry, I think the way the DOJ would normally deal with a situation like this, although in normal events, it probably would be prosecuted as a misdemeanor, maybe, and then you would very quickly try to do a diversionary program to mental health and focus on the underlying issues. But if for whatever reason you were prosecuting this case, you would be honest with the judge and you would say, here are the issues. This is not a vandal who's an Antifa terrorist. Here's the judge, what we're concerned about. And they didn't want to make this argument because they wanted to appease Donald Trump. Judge, what we're concerned about is that this individual, if you watch the tape, we're just worried about where she's going to go. And we're concerned about her safety. And we want to come up with a plan with the court of how to ensure someone who's having a mental health crisis is it. And I think the judge would be very receptive to that, whatever that outcome is. But of course, they wanted to treat her like she was a terrorist. They applied the wrong standard to treat her like a terrorist. And the judge, like, she's not a terrorist. So I'm not going to go by the standard where you say that she's some, terrorist out there who's trying, that's not who she is. And then when they tried to then say, well, we made a mistake, the judge, you made your motion. I rule on motions. That's what I do. Harry, what do you make of this all?
First, Ben, I think, and you've suggested this, there's no way to separate this case from the reflecting pool debacle, especially on the part of Jeanine Pirro, who is, by some accounts, hanging by a thread and has clearly displeased Maximum Leader by the debacle that, happened. She did a lot of, misconduct in the case, but they never had the goods, and now he's trying to get her to go back, etc. I think there's no way to separate it from that because, look, they've got some, evidence here of the crime, and, would they have charged it as a misdemeanor? Probably, but that can vary because the element that distinguishes it, $1,000 of damage. What they're saying is the cleanup was $1,000, but this is obviously mental illness, as you know, is just a huge part of the both state and federal systems, and the better institutions and policies make some accommodation for that. But even leaving that aside, she does some graffiti. She puts bubble bath in the water, and then she turns herself in. And she's talking while there, and everybody sees her. She's, there's nothing hidden about this. And the DOJ, what they had to prove was first that, as you said, some kind of, as Trump portrays her, what a vicious vandals, etc. And I think there he was trying to kind of yoke her to Davy Hearn and the reflecting pool. See, America, I've told you it's vandals all the time. But that just wouldn't fly. So the only thing left for them to get bail, and it's their burden to show, is that there would be no combination of circumstances that would reasonably assure her showing up for trial. Now, this is a woman who has not committed the crime of the century, probably not the crime of the month as far as DC and different monuments are concerned. But she is, she's made to order to try to play tough with. And she also turned herself in. That's a really big fact that influences judges. If she were going to be a flight risk and there would be no combination of circumstances that would secure her return for trial, why then in the world would she have turned herself in? So that was what the DOJ had to deal with. In most cases, I think you're right. You know, it would be important to really sort of hear from her and get a sense. I don't want to substitute our own kind of off-the-cuff review for an on-the-ground review, but it certainly seems plausible to me that this woman is someone that any sensible prosecutor would recognize as a kind of crazy person, and the criminal justice system can do only so much with them, but it's just not accurate to say there's no combination of circumstances. So, you know, she could have a ankle monitor and they can take her passport away if she has one. Of course, as you point out, she's homeless. And can you really show by clear and convincing evidence that she is a flight risk? And that is what they tried to do. Okay, they took a shot. But now that they lost, you have not so different from another discussion we had recently about Trump's trying to go back to the well of the Supreme Court in the E. Jean Carroll case. They're trying to now actually relitigate and present her, and they do this all the time. We've seen it so often in the alien area. Present this person who I think is going to turn out at trial, if she doesn't plead, to be a crazy person, not a, terrorist, but present her as nefarious and a deep criminal. And why are they doing that? Knowing probably that it's just not accurate. And that I think has everything to do with this is Trump and the monuments, and he's pissed at Jeanine Pirro. In other words, all factors that are not legit for trying to put somebody away before they've even been convicted, which is what, this is about. We've got a statute that's always been controversial, but its constitutionality has been upheld. But you really need to make a showing someone's dangerous or they're a flight risk before a trial before a court will order it. And the people who are on the ground and seeing her and looking at her, I think, have determined, no, this is not a crime of the century person. This is a probably very mentally ill person who we will not be able and won't even try to flee before trial. So she gets to be out under a condition of, again, they could have all kinds of monitors, ankle bracelets, and the like that would assure that she's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And it just talk about punching down.
Yeah.
Talk about punching down. I mean, okay, we can't get the David Hearn case. So now we're going to go after someone who was living in a tent on the street when Trump claims he's resolved all the homeless issues, which he didn't. And who's clearly suffering from a mental health crisis. And that's going to be our symbol of Antifa when, the person wasn't even saying anything like anti-Trump she was saying things about energy that were incoherent and videotaping herself urinating. And then this is a part too, she turned herself in the next day. She went to a Virginia courthouse, which why would you even go to the Virginia? She showed up at a Virginia courthouse, said what she did. And then, this is who Trump feels most comfortable going after. And to me, it says a lot.
And not just Trump, but Jeanine Pirro, who's totally scared and is totally insecure in her job. And this is what it means to be a tough prosecutor, is to lock a woman like this.
And they lost the initial motions.
Right, exactly.
They lost the initial motions.
Her record is spectacular.
They lost they lost the motion against, someone who was videotaping herself urinating on the floor, right. And they lost them. They can't, and I take these mental health issues. I deeply am concerned, but I'm just reflecting on, there's no one like you can't win a case against her. Y'all are, it's a bit of a struggle out there for this is what the DOJ's become. Everybody, and by the way, there should never be a prosecute. This is a mental health issue that should be treated separately. Subscribe to Harry Litman's YouTube channel, Talking Feds. After this is over, search Talking Feds. Tell Harry in the comments that Ben says hello. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben.
Before you go, our book, WTF America, is available for pre-order now. It's the story of how we got here and how we fight our way back. To pre-order, scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Let's do this.